You know, the one perfect cast, it seldom catches a fish. The truth of the matter is, on any given day, on any body of water, it takes dozens and dozens of perfect casts. And that's just to catch a few fish. So today, let's talk about the perfect cast. The cast that's the right angle, the right presentation, and when it all comes together, and that one cast happens to be the perfect cast. Hi everyone, thanks for joining me again today. And today we're going to be talking about the perfect cast. And we're going to get right into this because there's a lot to say on the perfect cast, and there's several definitions of the perfect cast, and I'm going to go over a couple of those definitions. The first definition of a perfect cast I'll go over is that cast where you pitch it out there, the bait never gets more than 6 inches off the water, it lands exactly on your target area, no splash, and it's just technically the perfect cast. And that's important. But that cast doesn't always catch the fish. So my definition of the perfect cast would be the cast that you catch a fish on. And that could be any cast, but generally that's a combination of the perfect technical cast. It's a cast that is much more well thought out on the angle that you're fishing and the area that you're fishing and what is actually your prime target area. And it's a combination of those things. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're also going to talk about a strategy that I call overcasting. So where your prime target is may not be where you want to place the cast all the time. We'll get into that and we'll explain just how that works. Okay, let's talk about the ingredients that have to come together in order to make up a prime target. And this is super important because it's not just the prime area, but it's the area around the prime area that you have to be thinking about. And this is all going to come together in about 2 minutes. And I'm going to spill some juice on this that I don't talk about a whole lot. And it's a technique that I use that I know over the years have caught me thousands of fish. So pay close attention. 3 things that we need for a prime target area. One is bait. Here on the Delta, through the summer months, it's probably crayfish and bluegill. So we've got a bait source. Number 2, we need an ambush point. And it could be a tule point, it could be a small ledge, it can be any type of vegetation, it could be a man-made, it could be a dock, it could be a post. But when largemouth bass come into shallow water, they like to have some type of cover that they can hide behind or use as an ambush point. So 2 things we're talking about: bait, an ambush point, and the third thing that doesn't get talked about a lot, and we're going to talk about this because we talk about this technique of overcasting prime targets, this comes into play, and it's what I call a sanctuary. And a sanctuary is generally either deep water or heavy cover. And that is a place to where when these big bass come up and they start hunting in shallow water and they feel threatened, maybe it's by a fisherman, maybe it's by some other predator that may be preying on them, they need a place that they can quickly get out and basically hide, feel comfortable. Get out to deeper water, get down, on the side of a ledge and get out of danger themselves. Now that could be out in deep water, it could be going into very heavy vegetation. So the 3 things that we talked about that make up a prime spot: bait, an ambush zone, bait, an ambush zone, and let's give this just a minute. All right. Sorry for the interruption. So we got a prime area, we got bait, we've got an ambush zone, and we have a sanctuary. So when we get into talking about the technique here, of fishing and overcasting the prime zone. We want to keep in mind where the sanctuary is, because oftentimes that prime zone that we're fishing to, even a great cast, even at the right time, fish may not be up on that ambush point feeding. They more than likely, most of the time, are out in their sanctuary somewhere. So as we're pulling up, we definitely want to fish the prime zones, but we want to be acutely aware of where that sanctuary is. So as we pull up on these places, we have two options. First option is going to be to fish the prime zone, overcast it, pull a bait into that prime zone a couple of times. Then we're going to go directly to where we think their sanctuary is, and that may be out in the deeper water, or it may be going deeper into the vegetation. We're going to get into that technique in just a minute. I'm going to pull out to a point or somewhere where we can actually go over the situation that I was just talking about, and then I'm going to go over some recent fish catches that I've had the last couple weeks, and we'll talk about, you know, the setup and why I caught the fish, or maybe why I didn't catch the fish, and we'll go over all of that so you can put all of these pieces of the puzzle together. So let's go out and find a nice point that we think is a prime ambush area. But we've got a bank that has a couple of prime targets, and if you can look well down the bank, there's other prime targets down there. So we're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about this technique of overcasting your prime target, and we're also going to touch on pace. And if you haven't watched my video finding your pace, you might want to check that out, and it'll help you to put, you know, this whole puzzle together. So let's say we're out, we're fishing, we've got a good pace, which means we're moving at the right speed. You're able to cover the bank that you're fishing efficiently with baits that you think are going to catch fish. Let's say we have 4 or 5 rods on deck, and those rods cover from top to bottom, and they also cover, you have a couple of baits that you can fish with that will come through heavy vegetation. So we're moving down the bank at our pace, and we are keeping our eyes well in advance of what's coming up. So when we see prime targets, we start to calculate how close we can get to that target without spooking the fish, the angle that we need. We need to think about, you know, depending on your casting skills, how far away can you stay away from that? That target. We don't want to spook fish. So we're starting to think of all these things well in advance. Now, on this particular piece of structure here, we've got one prime target that is a log right out in front of us. We have another prime target, and let's just say that this little Thule point here is another prime target. I know it doesn't look great, but we're just talking about demonstration purposes. And let's think, we'll talk about this first log out here as a prime piece of structure. I'm using this big heavy bait so you can see it splash down. Let's say we think that our fish is sitting right between those two logs. That is where the fish is. Now, one thing that we don't want to do is throw right on the fish's head, even the perfect cast. And we're going to talk about the flight or fight situation. If there is a bass sitting between those two logs, especially if I have a big bait or I make a bad cast that splashes down, I put it right on his head. That fish has two things that it can do. One of them, it's going to turn right around and eat that thing. That's the fight. That happens about 1 in 1,000 casts. More than likely, when that bait comes crashing down on that fish's head, it's going to go to the sanctuary area, meaning it's going to be spooked out of the shallow water. And let's just say in this situation, the sanctuary is out 7 or 8 feet. There's a ledge. The fish is going to go from that log out to the ledge and get in deep water, and you've just spooked that fish and blown the cast. So we don't want to put the bait on that fish's head. What we want to do is overcast that area by 10 or 15 feet and pull the bait into what we think is going to be where the fish is. Now, once it gets close to the fish, we can stop it, twitch it, work it, try to finesse that fish into biting. If it's a bottom bouncing bait, a jig or something, we can pull it through there and stop it and fish it very slowly and try to get that fish to bite. By doing that, we're fishing to the fish and we haven't spooked the fish. Now remember, I talked about the sanctuary area. Let's just say we throw 3 casts over your prime spot and you do not get a bite. Do not keep throwing your bait over the prime spot over and over. What you want to do is think about, okay, the fish didn't take the bait. He could be there. He may not be there. If he's there, he ain't going to take your bait. After the first 2, 3, 4 good casts, he's not going to take that bait. Let's just say in this situation, the fish isn't there. The fish is out on that ledge out there in his sanctuary. So what I like to do is come out and start fishing that sanctuary area before I move. Now, primarily when the fish is in shallow water, it's really aggressive and it's feeding, and that's your best chance of catching that fish. The cast that you overcast and pull it into the prime area. But if that fish is not in the prime area, and let's just say we fished this area before and we know that that ledge is out there, we want to take maybe not a surface bait, but maybe a jig or a worm or something, throw it out in the deeper water and slowly fish it in where we think the sanctuary is for that fish. In this case, it's the deeper water, and give ourselves a chance to catch that fish. It's sitting out in its sanctuary. If you pull a bait into that fish and it's the right bait at the right time, you can catch that fish even though it's not on a real hot feeding spree. So that would be the first thing that I would look at. I'll pull this around here a little bit and we'll talk about this little point right out here. Let's just say we think that's where the fish is. We don't want, and that's very shallow water. We don't want to drop that bait right on the fish's head. So what we're going to do is make a long cast, and not a very good cast there, but let's see. Hopefully you can see that bait, and let's just say right off the point, right in about there, that's where we think the fish is. That's where we slow it down and work it. Hopefully finessing that fish into a bite. Now in this particular situation, the sanctuary may not be out in deep water. Let's just say that's where we think the fish is, but the fish isn't there. His sanctuary may be pulling into that hyacinth up there and getting into cover. So what we want to do in this particular situation is work the prime area, see if we can get that fish. If there's no fish in there, we want to move the boat up and then maybe punch that area of hyacinth, because in this particular case, his sanctuary or her sanctuary may be in heavy cover going into the bank. So with that, think about how you line the boat up, how far away you are from your targets, so on and so forth, and really start putting some thought into the baits that will best cover the area that you're fishing. So you have the basic idea of what we're looking for here. Now I'm going to cut out to a couple of fish catches that I've had in the last couple of weeks, and we'll talk about specifically what I was doing to catch those fish, and I think it will all come together. So let's check it out. In this situation, our ambush point is that lone post that's about 5 feet off the bank. We're going to overcast it, take a couple of reel turns, stop the bait, maybe give it a twitch. There's the fish. I would have loved to overcast that one a little farther, but as I said before, the perfect cast is the one that catches the fish. So I'm going to take that cast. These sparse tules provide an excellent ambush point. On this particular cast, I got it to the other side of the tules, didn't really overcast the tules, but as the bait landed, the fish took the fight response. So I got the fish on this cast, but ideally, I would have loved to use the strategy of casting 5 to 6 feet beyond the point and bring that bait through the point slowly. By using this strategy through the course of the day, I know my odds are much greater of putting a better number of fish in the boat and also a better size class of fish in the boat. That's a frogfish there. So I know we all see the 3 minor points here, but on this particular cast, I'm targeting a piece of submerged Eladia right by the arrow. I overcast the Eladia, and as soon as I pulled it over the top, the fish came out and grabbed it. So on this particular cast, if I would have dropped it right in that middle point there, I may have scared the fish. But by overcasting my target, it looks like I made the right decision on this one. I was rewarded with a great fish. So this overcasting prime targets is a deadly technique. It's not only going to catch you a lot of fish, but it's going to catch you bigger fish. So before we leave, I want to put together a couple of pieces of the puzzle that is going to make this work for you, and I'm going to refer back to my video that we talked about, Find Your Pace. If you haven't watched that one, make sure you watch that one. So very briefly, we're going down, whether it's a delta bank or whether it's your favorite lake, you're going down at your pace. Your pace is a pace that you can efficiently use the baits that you need to use to fish your prime targets. You only have 4 or 5 rods on deck, and they're going to cover from top to bottom. You are looking, as you're going down the bank, 20, 50, 100 yards ahead of the boat so that you can identify these prime target areas. These are the areas that have maybe an ambush point, they've got a food source around them, and they have a sanctuary that the fish can go into deeper water and get away from predators. When you locate or when you feel you have one of those prime targets, you're going to pull your boat or kayak up in a place that you can comfortably make good casts. Now, hopefully that's as far away from that target as you can get and comfortably cast to it, depending on what your ability is when it comes to casting. You pull the boat up, you will decide what technique is going to be best suited for that piece of structure, whether it's a point, a dock, a Thule island, whatever it may be. We're not going to throw our first cast right where we think the fish is. We're going to try to figure out where we think the fish is, where he's setting up to ambush, and we're going to overthrow that fish by about 15 feet. We're going to pull whatever bait we feel is going to cover the water that we're fishing most effectively. We're going to pull that bait into the ambush zone, and when it gets into that ambush zone, then we're going to really slow it down, work it, twitch it, do whatever we think it's going to take to make that fish react to it. Generally, using this technique, first or second cast, you're going to get the fish. I don't throw more than 4 or 5 casts depending on the size of the area that I'm fishing. It's a kind of a hit and run type thing. I hit it, move around the point, start looking for the next prime location. So with that, take that all of that into consideration. Try to put the pieces of the puzzle together, and it takes a while. Before you know it, you're going to be going down the bank. You're going to have one eye 100 yards ahead of the boat, one eye on the bank. You're going to be casting with one arm, and you're going to be grabbing another rod with another arm and throwing the rod over your shoulder and picking up rods right and left. It'll all come together, believe me. It takes time and patience and just time on the water. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe. Until the next video, I'll see you guys on the water.